Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Achieving Circularity in Local and Regional Food Systems Development. I'm your host, Duncan Hilchey. I am director of the Thomas A. License Center for Civic Agriculture and Food Systems in Ithaca, New York. It's a beautiful day here in the Finger Lakes. And I'm editor-in-chief of the Journal of Agriculture, Food Systems, and Community Development. This workshop is the first in what we hope will be a series entitled Wicked Problems in Food Systems, co-sponsored with our sister program, the North American Food Systems Network. Over the next 90 minutes, we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most profound topics in food systems development today, community-based circular food systems. We have an excellent panel of experts speaking today, and we'll introduce them shortly. We will also be soliciting your input during this workshop, but until then, please keep yourselves muted and feel free to use the chat tool if you'd like to share something or ask a question. Chat will be monitored. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on the journal and the North American Food Systems Network, which is our co-sponsor. The Journal of Agriculture, Food Systems, and Community Development is the world's only community-supported journal focused on food systems and agriculture development. We are community-supported in that we offer shares to organizations and institutions around the world. Our impact factor is 3.2, and we've grown considerably in recent years. And we have key partners that you see here who support the journal's work. The co-sponsor of this Wicked Problems workshop is the North American Food Systems Network. NAFSN is a professional development organization focused on building skills and opportunities for community organizers, researchers, students, government officials, and activists who are working hard to make the world a better place through innovative food and farming programs, policies, and practices. You can learn more about NAFSN and its programs at nafsn.org. I would recommend checking out two programs, ACRE and CARROT. With ACRE, the Agricultural Cluster Resilience and Expansion Program, ACRE is looking to build partnerships with organizations and institutions around the world that are interested in teaching or training on the topic of strategic planning for value chains and other collective action projects like complex agroecological systems. With CARROT, we are seeking to collaborate with organizations working with local governments that would like to do a deep inventory and evaluation of their current programs, policies, and practices related to food and farming, from friendly policies to building short supply chains and fostering community food security. Let me or co-chair of NAFSN, Kim Hines, know if you are interested in learning more about these opportunities to engage with NAFSN. Now I'd like to share a little about our forthcoming call for papers, Community-Based Circular Food Systems, Meeting Current and Future Food Needs Through Local and Regional Food System Development. Meeting current and future food needs to be difficult in a VUCA world, a world that is increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Climate change, war, pandemics, industrialization and consolidation, land grabbing, environmental degradation, and growing inequality present both immediate and long-term challenges. However, better outcomes may result from pursuing opportunities inspired by a dramatic re-envisioning of our food system, both locally and across political boundaries. To that end, we have operationally defined community-based circular food systems as localized food systems that emphasize a community's health and well-being while minimizing waste and protecting shared natural resources. I've taken the liberty to put this community-based circular food system rubric together to stimulate some thinking on specific topical areas of research, policy, and practice related to circularity across the three domains of sustainability. So across the y-axis, you've got circular value chain components, production, value adding, distribution, consumption, and across the y-axis, you've got the three domains of sustainability. And in each cell, you've got examples of specific strategies, projects, programs that you might consider engaging in as a practitioner or working on in terms of applied research. So if you'd like a copy of this, we'll be able to send this to you after the workshop. Our workshop today is in two parts. The first part is to get perspectives from three circular food system experts. The second part, we will engage you in a dialogue about what you've heard and also ask you to address these three questions. And this part will be facilitated by Jacob Park. He is Associate Professor, the College of Business, Vermont State University, also referred to as Castleton University here in the United States. And he's a visiting professor of the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Along with Laura Witzling, Jacob is co-chair of JAFSCD's Shareholder Consortium. He specializes in the social and environmental dimensions of innovation, entrepreneurship, and international business, with a special focus in global agriculture food systems and climate change, and in energy transition-related issues in Africa, Asia Pacific, and the Caribbean, and other small island regions. Welcome, Jacob, and thank you for facilitating.
Thank you, Duncan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if you just turn to the next slide real quick. What I just want to do briefly before I introduce the three speakers that we have. This is a recent report that some of you may already know about, the FALC, the Agriculture Food Report. And I just highlighted three things that kind of keep us in a kind of a big picture sense of why the topic of circular food system is so important, in my opinion, but I'm sure opinion of many people that is on this workshop. So there are 3 points that in the report that highlighted I think is worth keeping in mind. That the current agricultural food system imposed a huge hidden cost. It's not so hidden depending on the region, but overall, FAO estimates that $10 trillion a year is impacted, or negatively impacted, which is about 10% of the global GDP. So what I think that we should think about is that the reason why the topic of circular food system is so important is because we're talking about 10% potentially of the global GDP, which is, again, a lot of sort of economic impact, as well as, and this is the second point, that the 20% of that hidden cost, or not so hidden at times, comes from environmental related, specifically greenhouse gases, nitrogen emissions, land use change. All these issues were not able to be addressed beyond that. So let me just take the time to just highlight the third point, which is that and the other reason why we think about this beyond US, Europe, is that low-income countries are disproportionately impacted by this hidden cost. Those are the 3 points I just want to highlight and keep us in terms of why I think this idea of a circular food system, the topic of the special issue, is so important. So next slide, please. So I just love to introduce three speakers, and I'm just going to very quickly give their background. So Felipe Cozim Melges, who is a PhD candidate and a pharmacist in ecology group at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Felipe is a native of Brazil, and I believe you just got his PhD at 2020, and he specializes and focuses on securing biodiversity within circular food systems, and he specializes in land use change, modeling biodiversity, food systems, and environment. María Alonso Martínez, who is a junior officer in the circular development with the organization known as ICLEI. I could sort of, the former name, I should emphasize, is really known as ICLEI, is the International Council for Local Environment Initiatives for sustainability. And she is based in Bonn, Germany. And Maria has an academic professional background in business management, environmental policy, and food sociology. Our third speaker, Dr. Michael Kotutwa Johnson, who's of the Hopi descent, he is received his PhD in natural resources from the University of Arizona and a master's degree from Pepperdine as well as a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from Cornell University. Dr. Johnson is a faculty member and assistant specialist within the School of Natural Resources. And Michael's also co-author on the Indigenous chapter in the National Climate Assessment 5, which is, I believe, the most recent one just came out. And his newest initiative is the call for restoration of the American Indian food systems based on the stewardship principles of Indigenous conservation, which I'm very excited to hear more about if Dr. Johnson wants to do that. So with that, let me just turn to Felipe to get us going with our presentations.
Thank you, Jacob. Nice to be here. A real pleasure to present and to be in such illustrious company. I'd like to share a little bit about what we're doing in our group. I started my PG in 2020, and I would like to talk a little bit about it. Next slide, please, Duncan. So we'll be talking a little bit about redesigning food systems through circularity to remain within the planetary boundaries. Next slide. This is the work of Hannah van Zanten, my supervisor, the leader of our group, and she's been, and together with the team, we've been studying circularity for quite some time, in particular on a level of continent and country level for Europe. Next slide. So are the animations working? And so next, until they go to the end, because I have good and bad news with this slide. The good news is that, Duncan, you can go all the way to the end, Duncan, for the slide. Thank you. The good news is that we finally have all the planetary boundaries mapped out. And this is about all the good news I can give you, because the bad news is that we're transgressing most of them. And unfortunately, a major culprit of this transgression is agriculture at this point, right? If you can go to the next slide. Yes, then all right, to the next one. Good. The paradox and the challenge here is that while our agricultural systems are already very much transgressing a lot of the operational space of the planet, we still have a growing population, and we're supposed to reach 10 billion by 2050, right? So how do we conciliate these two very serious topics? Next slide, please. Yeah, so the problem with that is agriculture inherently the problem. What we observe nowadays is a lot of the problems that we have in this transgression of the operating space, the planetary boundaries, has to do with how agriculture has been conducted, right? Very intensive systems akin to a colonial mentality of extraction and linearity in terms of how we deal with the resources. Next animation. Very meat-rich diets to a point that we even associate economic development with the consumption of meat. Next one. And the inevitable pushback, right? So nowadays we see a lot of these big documentaries and even figures saying we need to go more plant-based. Next animation. And what we do see is that, well, the numbers do support that we do need to consider the amount of meat that we consume. The amount of protein, grams of animal protein that we have in our diets is directly connected to both land use and greenhouse gases, right? Next slide. And what we can see is that, well, is the problem then just these specific factors, or is it the fact that we're dealing with a linear system and we get stuck in trying to remove specific parts? Next slide. Our solution is, well, let's talk a little bit about then transitioning to a circular food system in which we don't see parts as the problem, but rather the interaction between the parts, right? Next slide. And to do so, we start with animals. So these seem to be the most talked about culprit in terms of the, the planetary boundaries transgression. And we wanted to know, well, animals have been with humans and human societies for a very long time, livestock, right? So what is the deal? Are they inherently problematic, or is it the way that we're having them? Well, the good news is that actually we do think that animals have a very important function in circular food systems. They're extremely important to recycling and actually reobtaining nutrients that would otherwise be lost to us. In our studies, we have observed that if we were to feed livestock just with the leftovers of the food system, we could obtain from 9 to 23 grams of protein to feed our daily diets. It's very hard to see here, but this is based on a requirement of 60 grams of protein per day. Later, on the next slide, what we can see is that if we actually go for a circular food system that uses animals in this way, we have less need of arable land. Our land use is even lower than if we were to go completely vegan. Next slide. And when we compare this to the Eat Lancet diet, what we have realized is that, well, circular food systems also do produce less greenhouse gas emissions. They are responsible for less greenhouse gas emissions than even the Eat Lancet diet if we were to go to such a system. Thing is, they are not necessarily healthy, right? So if you look at the healthy and healthy minus points, you represent diets that are actually also considering human health in them. And the healthy minus one is considering refined products within it. Moving forward. So with that, what we've realized is, sure, nice. We've understood that animals do have like importance in the system. They have a role to play. What would happen if our entire landscape was to be designed to optimize the circular food system in a European context? To do that, we've created the CIFOS model, which is the main work of our group. Next animation. It helps us understand where to grow which crops. Next. What kind of food to eat to respect both human and planetary health. Next one. Which animals to keep and how many in which areas. Next. And how to fertilize our crops, which is also a very hot topic here in the Netherlands and in Europe as a whole at this point. I'd like to share with you guys a bit of the results. I don't know if you guys can see it really well. We tested for 4 scenarios, right? Scenario agri-base is pretty much the baseline. So we established, if you can go back, Duncan, because I think otherwise they're not going to be able to see. Thank you. If you look at the slides, you're going to see the scenario agri-base is our baseline. So we're actually just simulating the data that we have from the FAO right now. And you can see that we use 172 million of hectares of arable land in Europe at this point. 1.17 tons of CO2 emitted per person per year, and we do have 83 grams of protein per person per day, a lot of it meat-based. The scenario zero agri is if you just go circular. So if it were just to allow animals to feed on the waste that we produce and use part of the waste to also fertilize our crops, applying circularity principles, and suddenly we go to 50 million hectares of land being used through this optimization. So it's a reduction of, roughly 3 times. And we decrease the per capita emissions of CO2 to 0.91, right? The amount of animal protein is also kept the same, the scenario zero agri, so we can test. And then we try, okay, one step further. Now let's go for also considering health. Let's decrease the amount of animal proteins and see what happens. Land use remains the same. We still need 50 million hectares. This is scenario zero health, by the way. But we decrease emissions to 0.83 per person per year. And we decrease a bit the supply of proteins to 64. We're still above the 60 grams recommended, right, per day. Lastly, we've tested what if Europe tried to remain feeding part of the world, like we've seen now with a lot of the crises and breakdowns in the supply chain. If Europe had to keep exporting food to some areas, and we maximize the amount of food that we can produce. So if we were to feed extra 787 million people, we would still use less land in a circular food system than we use today. We would have a lower per capita emission of CO2, but the total emission would go up. So please be a bit careful because we have to add these new people into the mix. And the diet would be very similar to the scenario zero health. So this is a bit of what we found. You can go to the next slide. This it's hard to see in there, but what you can see is how the landscape would look like. We can also have this sort of spatially explicit where each crop and livestock would be allocated. So if we go to the next slide. Well, what I like to tell you guys, because I have to be short and hopefully sweet here, is that there are multiple ways to apply circularity when we're talking about a continent or country level scale. But we've managed to find 5 main lessons, takeaway lessons that seem to be no regret solutions across all these contexts. First one, next animation, Duncan, please, is transition to sustainable energy sources and use to decrease the amount of emissions, consuming a healthy diet. So actually designing our food systems to attain not only a diet that is responsible for the planetary boundaries, but for human health. Next one. Avoid the waste present in our food system. And when that waste is not, we're not able to avoid it, then reusing it, recycling it. One of the things that we're really testing now is what would happen if we were to actually even use human excreta to fertilize our crops. How much of these nutrients could we actually recover? And the last one, is to go on a more diverse cropping system. I think we might hear more of it today from other participants, but these are the 5 takeaway solutions that you can absolutely apply in any circular food system that would already bring the results that we can see in our model. If we go to the next slide, what we observed, there are multiple ways to go for circular food systems. As you can see in the scenarios that we've tested, you can try to keep the amount of meat and diets based on the cultural aspect that we have. You can actually try to design new food systems that aim for healthier diets, or we can even try to remain export powerhouses. But all of them represent a powerful and positive change, considering the systems we have now. If you guys are interested in learning more and in more detail without having to rush through it, I would like to invite you guys to read the full paper. It's now in Nature. If we can go to the next one, Duncan. That's the paper. Feel free to read it. Feel free to contact the team or myself. I work more on the biodiversity aspect, like was mentioned, but I'm very happy to answer any of these questions. And if we can go to the next slide, I would like to thank you all for your attention. And as any good scientist, the animation is great with the resolutions, but if we can go to the last one, I think scientists should say, I think, yeah, it's missing.
Let's move on.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it's missing one slide, but it's all good. Thank you.
Hey, Jacob, would you like to introduce our next speaker?
I already said the introduction, so we can just go right to that.
All right. Maria, if you would unmute.
Yes, sorry, I missed that introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. You can go to the next slide already, Duncan. Thank you. My name is María Alonso Martínez, and I'm part of the Circular Development team here at ICLEI World Secretariat. We're based in Bonn, Germany, although I'm originally from Almería, which is a small town in the southeast corner of Spain. I'm very excited to be here in representation of ICLEI Circulars and be taking you through our definition of circular food systems from a local governance perspective, as well as showing you some of the best practices from cities around the world that we are currently working with. So we can go to the next slide, please. Let me begin by introducing the organization I represent today. ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability is a global network of more than 2,500 local and regional governments around the world that are dedicated to promoting sustainable urban development. We're active in more than 125 countries, and we play a crucial role in shaping sustainable policies and fostering local initiatives for low emissions, nature-based, resilient, and circular development at the local level. So circular development, which is my team, is one of ICLEI's 5 strategic pathways towards sustainable urban development. And we aim to help local governments to separate economic growth from excessive resource consumption. And we work towards ensuring a fair access and distribution of resources while closing loop systems in both urban and peri-urban areas. So one of the thematic areas that we strive to do this with is actually food systems. So if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Now that we made the initial introductions, let's dive into some of the facts about our current linear food systems, which, spoiler alert, and also as my colleague has shared already, they're not doing too well. And it's both affecting us and the planet. So I would like to share some facts here. First, food is inefficiently lost and wasted along the food value chain. Nearly 1/5 of all the food that is produced globally currently goes to waste, and less than 2% of the nutrients of that waste are discarded and not safely reintroduced in the value chain. Moreover, population is increasing, fastly moving to our urban areas, and currently 79% of all the food we produce is meant for consumption in cities. So if everything else remains constant, we will have to increase food production by a staggering 60% by 2050 to meet our needs. So here's the catch: trying to achieve all of these with our current linear food systems would have severe consequences for our climate, our health, biodiversity, And here is why. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Let's take a closer look at how our current linear food systems are generally operating. So they essentially follow the take, make, and waste model, which comes with a set of challenges. There's heavy reliance on finite resources, think fossil fuels, phosphorus, single-use plastics, and so on. There is high complexity and lack of transparency. Chains are opaque, making it difficult to govern and monitor effectively. There's also high concentration of power among fewer players, compromising sovereignty. There's also substantial food loss and waste, as we just saw, and valuable nutrients are not really put to use. So these characteristics not only pose threats to food security and the health of our ecosystems, but they're also contributing to worsening the climate crisis. So in order to address some of these issues, we propose community-based food systems, circular food systems, as circularity as the main entry point. So next, please. Let's explore them there. Circular food systems are just a perspective that views food systems as interconnected chains, which aims to close resource loops and optimize the use of new resources. So these systems not only can provide an alternative, but also even a complement to traditional approaches, striving to make food production more environmentally friendly and health conscious. At the same time, circular food systems also have the potential to support local economic development and promote social equity, while actually minimizing non-renewable inputs in production, minimizing the number of intermediaries between producers and consumers, and minimizing a sustainable transport and food distribution. Moreover, they can also maximize the nutritional value of the food, the redistribution of that food that is not consumed, and lastly, the reintroduction of nutrients in the value chain. Next, please. So these systems come with a pool of benefits that can actually make them a win-win approach for various reasons. The first one is that they can actually reduce carbon footprints. They can reduce this embedded carbon in food waste. They can also protect natural carbon sinks and generate energy from a sustainable source, for example, by using anaerobic digestion from organic waste and so on. They can also reduce the reliance on scarce resources that increases resilience at the same time. They can also alleviate pressure on natural resources, aligning with natural regeneration rates of ecosystems through incentivizing practices like regenerative agriculture. They can also enhance and incentivize sharing practices and resource sharing. And additionally, they can also create employment opportunities through social enterprises that bolster local innovation and employment while promoting shorter food supply chains. So in essence, circular food systems can offer a holistic approach, a lens to look at the food value chain that provides environmental, social, and economic potential benefits for communities and ecosystems alike. Next, please. Moving into more the practical part of this presentation, we came up with this framework to operationalize circularity that can also be applied to food systems. So together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Circular Economy and Metabolic, ICLEI has developed the Circular City Actions Framework, which is the graph you can see. This framework revolves around 5 strategies, which are rethink, regenerate, reduce, reuse, and recover, what we call the 5 Rs. And we use this as an entry point to operationalize circularity at the local level. Next, please. So guided by this framework, we've created a variety of resources to help cities make this transition towards circular food systems at the local level. So today I'm excited to share with you one of these resources, which is the City Practitioners Handbook series. These handbooks are toolkits who are designed specifically for cities that provide tools to both kickstart and support the adoption of circular food systems at the local level. This handbook aims to assist cities in identifying and engaging relevant stakeholders, as well as guiding cities in designing effective policies and intervention all along the food value chain. So it draws from best practices gathered from all over 50 local governments worldwide. So the global version is available in English, and we recently adapted it to the context of Latin America. So the handbook is now available also in Portuguese and Spanish. Next slide, please. I want to share some of the examples that are showcased in this handbook from the dimensions of regenerating and reusing resources. The first one is Seoul's Agricultural Technology Center, because this as city-affiliated center is offering training and technical support to its citizens who are interested in urban and peri-urban agriculture. So the center is continuously expanding its curriculum to offer different classes, and they recently added a course on circular aquaponic systems. So this knowledge is easily available for all the residents in Seoul that would like to take a course. The second example are Milan's local food waste hubs, which is very interesting because in Milan, these hubs have been established to recover surplus food, both from local supermarkets and school canteens. So this recovered food is then redistributed to those most in need through neighborhood networks. And the municipality has actually played a crucial role here because they've been allocating city-owned buildings for storing and redistributing this recovered food. Additionally, they've also been rewarding businesses that donate food with a 20% reduction in their waste management task. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's many, more than 50 case studies that you can check, spanning various policy instruments that hopefully can inspire cities also in their circular journey. So for more in-depth insights, I will be sharing the link later on in the chat in case you want to take a look. Next slide, please. So just another project I wanted to share with you before ending is the AfriFood Links project, which is a great example of how circular food systems can be used as a tool for community development around the world. So this project wants to enhance food security and nutrition while fostering positive environmental outcomes. So this initiative is making a difference in over 65 cities in Europe and Africa, and is doing so by championing circular food systems at the local level. So one of our entry points is the development of business incubator programs in South Africa, Burkina Faso, Tunis, Kenya, and Uganda. And we're supporting more than 250 circular entrepreneurs and investing in 25 high-impact businesses with circularity potential. So our goal is to embed circularity within local communities. And to achieve this, we collaborate with knowledge holders to make decisions that are informed by the local context. So a key element to this approach, and I think that's also a key aspect for in general community development, has been the decolonization of knowledge about African urban food systems, ensuring that traditional and indigenous knowledge is given preferential space and importance in this transition. So throughout this journey, we discovered that knowledge about circular food systems is already present, and often the real challenge lies in actually recognizing its value and scaling it up to benefit cities. So this project not only stands as a testament of like how powerful circular food systems can actually be, but also highlights the importance of respecting and incorporating diverse forms of knowledge if we want to achieve circularity in local and regional food systems development. So if we go to the last slide, please. So we offer a wide range of resources and support for cities on our website that is called ICLEI Circulars. So if your city is interested to start this journey or know more about circularity, please get in touch with us through this email. So this is the end of my presentation today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria, for your excellent presentation. Can I just invite Dr. Michael Kotutwa Johnson for his presentations? Dr. Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead and pop the first slide. Okay, making most with less in indigenous perspective. So this is how a system has been working for the last 3,000 years, at least on the Hopi reservation where I'm from. Next slide. So we know that the community-based circular food systems, this is a common definition. We can see that it has regenerative approaches, design and market with the health outcomes, and also making the most of food. And so next slide. So where does this knowledge come from? Well, it's passed down from generation. In my case, I'm a 250th generation farmer. A part of our agricultural system is that we farm up on the Hopi reservation, but we don't use any irrigation at all. No man-made irrigation. We only receive 6 to 10 inches of annual rainfall a year. And so all these techniques that we have done for thousands of years have been tried, true, and tested, and just now are considered a science. Go ahead. So what is indigenous agricultural knowledge? First, it's an applied knowledge for raising food and other agricultural products that is grounded in indigenous belief systems and practices which have been time tested over millennia. So when I'm talking about indigenous belief systems and practices, that is the key component to what makes these systems so resilient. Next slide. So Hopi is one of the few places I know where corn is raised to fit the environment, and the environment is not manipulated to fit the corn. You know, that's kind of rare in its aspect here because, you know, most commonality is that we use a lot of different types of pesticides, herbicides, and different soil amenities to produce a crop like corn, but at Hopi, we don't do that. We work with the environment, and yield with the environment gives us only about 1 to 5 acre farms. Go ahead. So indigenous people protect 80% of global biodiversity now on a mere 25% of the planet's land, with only less than 5% of the world's population. Gross domestic product globally depends about over half of that depends upon biodiversity and natural resources. So indigenous people are looking at that as a way to keep doing what they were doing. Okay, go ahead. The preservation of crop biodiversity, of course, you know, is very important. Currently, we're still focused on the 6 major crops or 7 major crops that are passed out globally. At Hopi, we have over like 17 different varieties of corn. I would call it the true last bastion of crop biodiversity in America. We have over about 10 different varieties of beans, just as many melons, and a lot of different plants of squash, including the gourds, and also some peach and orchard trees that we got from the Spanish way back in the 1500s. But all these are extremely drought tolerant. Go ahead. So an example of these drought tolerant crops, this is a crop we don't receive water or any rainfall, significant rain from all the way from about March all the way to the end of July when we get monsoon rains. But this is during a drought, and you can see how well that plant is thriving in the middle of the desert Southwest stuff where I'm from. Go ahead. So what do? First of all, we use a lot of environmentally friendly. Now this is important, place-based adaptive management techniques. I think that's one of the most important things, because you cannot take this system and put it someplace else, but you can learn a lot from it by looking at what we're doing as far as place-basedness is concerned. A lot of people ask me, well, why don't you rotate your crops? If you look at the center picture, one of the center pictures there, that's all new soil from which one monsoon event, which brings in all new nutrients, and these fields are very strategically located. Down below on the right-hand corner is an example of why I clump things together. First of all, it helps with the heat. It also keeps it from blowing over. It protects the inner ears from predation like crows. And during the wintertime, when we do get the rain of the snows, those act like snow catchers. So as the snow blows across the field, it's caught up on that. And in the following year, we plant in between those rows. And so, because that's where the moisture is at, because all of our techniques are designed to conserve soil moisture. Go ahead. So when we talk about distribution out to the circular thing that we're talking about, it's the women's role who does a lot with that. They know the community more than anybody. So they're key to all this circular distribution. They go out and they look for the different traits from the different crops, and they use those following seeds for the following year. And so that's why the biodiversity and the lines are so well maintained over all these years. And so even during drought years, they'll take those particular crops and they'll go ahead and save that for another drought year. Go ahead. Food security is based on just indigenous ways of knowing. This is just a quick example of this. This is corn that was roasted in a pit. It's our own variety, and because we don't use irrigation or anything like that, you know, our only soil amenities, they're very nutrient dense. I would say almost 10 times more than what you're eating in the supermarket as far as sweet corn is concerned. And so that corn is kept like that. It's put up on after it's dried out. You can have that corn 30 to 50 years later. Believe it or not, all you do is boil it up and you can still have that. I've had that before. That's real food security. Go ahead. So what is the value of all this? Well, that's just really the relationship with nature. When we're talking about preserving the environment, very few people can understand that. And this is one of the reasons that we still have 80% of biodiversity in indigenous territories throughout the globe. This is just a picture of when I'm talking about the relationship. That's my house on the left-hand side or your right-hand side, built out of sandstone from the local places out there. On the other side, there's a little bird building his house out of stone. So if you can understand the relationship that those things two have, that's very important. But sometimes we just don't slow down enough to get that. So go ahead. So what are the benefits of these indigenous farming practices? And they could be benefits to everybody. First of all, it helps reduce obesity because the work that is required in the nutritional food that is produced. It reinforces family culture or family values because everyone is involved in the process. It stabilizes the family so nobody goes hungry. You know, this distribution system is such that, you know, the women know who's hurting and who's not. You know, it's environmentally friendly. Like I said, we only have 1 to 5 acre fields. In fact, 70% of of our global thing is produced on small acres, which are about 1 to 5, and then it increases the concept of sharing, which is very important because we get to talk to each other and we're not stuck, with the cell phone stuff. And also, the most important thing is that you learn to have a real respect for the land and what it provides, because if you don't have that, you're going to wind up being an extractionist. And we also know what the end of that result is. Next slide. So that's about it. So thank you very much. That's just my house. And you can see the climate out there, how dry it is. And to raise corn in that environment with only 6 to 10 inches of annual rainfall a year is pretty good. So thanks a lot.
Wow, Michael, that was an excellent presentation. I'd just love to hear it. Now, someone will follow up. And did I hear correctly that you mentioned that corn for 30, 40 years? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. It can be stored that long because of its nutrient density and how it's been brought up.
And how do you store it? Where do you store it?
We just hang it up because we're in a dry climate. We hang it up usually in a dark room or someplace in the house, and you can just bring that out as soon as you need it.
I'm going to belabor the point. So you're literally hanging the corn in your house and you could for 30 years and you can still eat it?
Yes, you can, because there's no humidity there. And so it stores just like that. As long as you don't take the kernels off of the cob, it can store for a long, long time.
Wow, well, I'm going to write that down because that's amazing, actually, in terms of food preservation. So we're going to move on to the next part of our workshop, looking at sort of. So we thought that that we might just have questions. We have 3 questions laid out. And we're going to devote approximately 8 to 10 minutes for each question, and just want to invite the participants as much as they can to sort of contribute sort of their thoughts about it. And the first question is in front of the screen right now. How can or should circularity be defined in the context of a local regional food system development? I don't know the best way to sort of, Amy, can I ask you whether there might be something in the chat that we could use to maybe start the conversation, or maybe invite somebody from the participants or one of the speakers perhaps to start?
I don't see any chat that directly responds to that.
Okay.
We did have a little bit of a discussion about the value of the FAO report, but
okay. Since Dr. Johnson Michael was able to talk about that, does he have any maybe starting off with from his experience from being a Hopi descent and looking at indigenous local knowledge as a very important. So where does that fit in, Michael, you think, in terms of circularity and indigenous local knowledge, which obviously both are very important?
Well, I think too many times, we're still looking at everything from a global domestic product standpoint of view. So you have global north, global south, things like that. And so I'm proposing, in order to get this thing moving and to get active more participation, so we start labeling these areas that have high biodiversity, high biodiversity territories and low biodiversity territories. So you get the rise of the indigenous people at the top of the chain, so that we can learn what they're doing rather than always classifying them as victims, right? And so that's one of the main things. And hopefully at that time, we'll spurn some conversation, some meaningful conversation of we're able to be invited to the table like we are here. And I think that's most important. So that's how I would kind of define that for that approach, I think.
Super, that's very helpful. Maybe Felipe, since you talked about Europe as sort of as an kind of the basis of your analysis, when you're thinking about local regional food systems and maybe perhaps some ideas from the Nature article that was published. Any thoughts, Felipe, from your end about this issue?
Yeah, I think I have very broad abstract thoughts as opposed to what Dr. Johnson just said. It's much more practical and interesting. So I think I can add 2 things. The first one, actually, Dave had very nice coffee with me just a while ago, so it was something we were talking about. I feel like the definition of what local and regional food systems look like is also very arbitrary in a lot of senses, right? So for example, we consider circularity to be an European issue, but it might be much more sustainable for Spain to trade with Morocco than it is with Sweden. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered more on the social and economic aspect as of what circularity is, as opposed to taking it for granted as a natural science modeling aspect. So I think we need to maybe rethink a bit what are the boundaries when we talk about local and regional food systems, and who do we want to cooperate with? Is it more biome based? Is it more hydrological basin based? Is it more cultural based? So what are the kind of criteria that we're clustering these groups together? And the second thing is, I think, just to add very minorly to what Dr. Johnson was saying, while I'm here in the Netherlands, I'm a Brazilian by birth and by upbringing, right? And I just wanted to corroborate that this kind of victimization happens around all over the South as well, right? So we're seeing this very often with this kind of victimization of indigenous people, and even not only indigenous, but even traditional people like the Quilombolas and so on. So I feel that when it comes to these global models that we've got, or even continental models, the question becomes, well, sure, we can give information as to the natural limits, but these people should be the ones leading the change and deciding how it's done.
So I'm just looking at some of the questions from the chat, and I think that I don't know if Maria, you want to handle this question about within your work. I noticed that should there be more of a clear distinction between sustainability, circularity, and resiliency? We sometimes use that term interchangeably. From your work, do you see that that's a very important distinction we need to make, or perhaps these are important distinctions but without much of a difference?
That's a good question, actually. Thank you for that. I feel like in terms of circularity, as in every other concept, right? It's just a matter of how you actually define it, define it at the local level, what's important. Because when talking about circularity, for example, I can associate it with, for example, the last stages of the value chain, for example, recovering nutrients. But for example, in a Nordic European country, circularity can be associated with the actual needs. For example, I have a need, I have a lot of food waste, I want to reduce it, I want to recover nutrients. Maybe I have to define circularity in this way so that it matches my priorities. We're also seeing through cities, for example, through the AfriFood Link cities, Northern and Sub-Saharan African cities that would like to define circularity actually as something that regenerates ecosystems, something that fosters short supply chains and entrepreneurial support and so on. So I think that all of these terms, and for example, circularity as well, there needs to be a common understanding, sure, but there also needs to be conceptualized so that they actually match the needs of what is needed locally.
Super. That's super helpful. Duncan, maybe we should go to the second question. Maybe we just time's up. So second question is talking about how we could, and this kind of gets at the idea of resiliency and what the distinctions might be, but how to localize and regionalize food system circularity that connects with social justice and community health. And there was a question, I should also just mention that the distinction question came from Trisha Jenkins, so I want to just to shout out to her for asking the question. And we have a question, a comment from Non Milan, if I'm pronouncing his or her name correctly. And here she talks about how the food systems should be from the bottom up, and I think this kind of gets to the question of social justice, community health as well. Maybe could I just get Michael to talk a little bit about does a term bottom up approach, is that meaningful in terms of context of the things we're talking about, indigenous local knowledge, or is that a slightly different topic?
No, I from the bottom up, it's always kind of been like that. It's usually the people out here, at least the way our society is held together. It's the farmers who are doing this, but we're just farming. It's the women who basically own the fields, own the seeds, own everything else like that. And so when you're talking bottom up, you're talking just kind of like the bottom is vast.
Right.
It's a big place. And so it's not just one person up at the top making the decisions for everybody. Everybody has a role in our agricultural system. And I think that's probably one of the most important things, that everybody's involved. So everybody kind of understands what everybody's doing. And so that's how it kind of works out here.
So when we're talking about social justice and community health, is it implicit within the indigenous local knowledge framework, or is that duplicative? Is it complementary? Is that always the same? I'm just trying to understand, like,
No,
all these different
well,
terms.
the community health is definitely in there. I mean, everybody raises things and they take care of each other in that way. The social justice is something that, we don't really look at that. It's kind of like we look at it from the outside. Are we, for example, there's just lack of natural resource data in Indian country, not only here in the United States, but probably across the globe. And so, we can't take advantage of all these different federal programs if we want to utilize them because we don't have the data. And so, but that's where the social justice would come in. It would be coming from that point. It would come in from the outside rather than from the inside, because the inside people are pretty social. And so there's big social society, but it always comes in from the outside.
Okay, all right. Maybe I can just invite Felipe or Maria if you have any thoughts about that as well in terms of social justice for and community health, either from a European perspective or some of the work Maria you've done with ICLEI in terms of those issues. As it's kind of, because there are a lot of terms out there that we're trying to do, right? Is this a big tent? Indigenous local knowledge, obviously we care about that. We care about social justice, community health. Are they trade-offs? Do they complement each other? So one emphasizing one also leads to the other, which kind of leads into our third question, but I'll maybe get us started with that.
Would you like to go ahead, Felipe? Okay, great. So just to say a few thoughts about this, actually, from the local government perspective, I think so local governments in the end are working to translate all of these fancy great international food policies, national food policies to the local level. So it is their responsibility to be able to translate them to the local context, right? So it is very key that we actually take a multi-stakeholder perspective so that we can ensure that there is actual inclusivity and social justice happening, and there is a shared sense of responsibility when localizing these policies. So in order to ensure social justice, all of the stakeholders needs to be involved in the decision-making processes. So it is the only way to actually draw effective interventions and initiatives that are actually circular and working for the community. So all stakeholders actually play a unique role in shaping these food systems. So this means local communities, research communities like this one, government officials, all working together. So actually local governments can actually facilitate these platforms for dialogue. And I would like to highlight, for example, the government of Baltimore, and the city actually has a food policy action coalition that gathers a lot of different NGOs, members, university, farmers, businesses, so that there is like a space for dialogue and collaboration to actually tackle some of these like food policy, food justice issues, and so on. So we need both vertical integration and horizontal integration to make sure that actually we can make this socially just, I would say.
Excellent. We actually have a question from a chat or comment. Maybe this might be Felipe might do this. So the question regarding indigenous local knowledge. So Europe is in North America to a lesser degree, but of course more in Europe. How does indigenous practice in Europe show up in your work in analysis? Because obviously there are strong local indigenous traditions within Europe itself, although it's not regarded necessarily as a place for those kind of things. But clearly I can think of any number of examples of that fits in. So where did that show up? And that question should go. Just want to thank Lori Wayne for that question about indigenous practice in Europe and how does it show up in Europe.
Well, I can give you an informed opinion, right? We work with like large landscapes, so I don't want to assume in my hubris to be an expert on this topic. What I can tell you is that we consider in the model, for example, diets and what kind of crops are consumed. This is something that we do actually use for, especially for the baseline, what kind of crops are indigenous to some regions and are planted there for those reasons. We do not have at this point considerations of management practices, for example. This is something that we're working very heavily on now. What I can tell you from experience here is that a lot of this indigenous, ways of doing things are translated into, the practices from those regions. But I don't see particularly the same kind of care or preservation as we see in different places. And I do, again, this is an informed opinion, but I do see that they're taking more as different or alternative cultural ethnical groups in here rather than indigenous necessarily. You see, I think that as of this point, Indigenous is still very much relegated to this understanding of the places that have actually suffered with colonization. And then there, even in that, maybe, I guess we can see some kind of still contrasting understanding of what is Indigenous, right? So in here, I see more of this, oh, these are just different cultures or different aspects or different, as opposed to what we see in like what Dr. Johnson mentioned, for example, which is more of like this victimization. So these Indigenous people that need help, that need to be taken care of. I don't see that here. Again, this is just my informed opinion. I don't want to.
Okay, well, why don't we just sort of move on to the third question, which talks about how could we make this happen, right? And I think this is a big question that that we could talk about it, we could do special issues on it, but how do we make that happen? I think certainly one of the criticism you could talk about the climate change movement, trends and whatnot is that the problems seem to be getting bigger and bigger, while the solutions seem to be narrowing in terms of what could be done. In terms of the food systems, in terms of circularity, in terms of integrating with local Indigenous knowledge, social justice, how do we make this happen? So to do that, so maybe I could start with, I'm going to monitor the chat along with Amy to see any questions. There was in the chat for people to notice, Katie Bart mentioned something about a local distribution model called farm stops, that you can find in the chat in terms of different ideas. So maybe I could start with Michael, Dr. Johnson, about your ideas about
Yeah, I've been thinking about this carefully, and I just can't see a real way out until we shift our market system and we engage and we start looking at the quality of things rather than and I'm talking nutritional values of things rather than the standard of globalization, which focuses on efficiency and quantity. I think that's the thing, because when you're focusing on that, you're having to use all those inputs. You're only focusing on those 7 big crops out there nationally, and you're missing the whole thing. There's been studies up here now in Washington State University where they've gotten like $10 million grant to try to put more nutrients into these crops that are globally out there. But what is that really going to do? That's still going to require more land to be plowed up to put those same crops on it over again. We need to really think about, our prior models, the smaller farms, and the regenerative aspects of things. And as you have smaller farms, you have more people talking with each other. It's just not me talking with a big corporate 4,000 acre farm. And so, but to really involve more people in the process, my solution is to try to change the market system where quality is pretty much near the top of what we're producing rather than quantity based upon efficiency.
That's excellent. Felipe, and then Maria and Felipe, in terms of your thoughts about how do we make this happen? We talked about, so we're, as academics and researchers, we're very good at problematizing the problem, making it so complex that no solution can be done. So how do we make this happen? To the extent that, we could talk about that. So whatever order you think works best.
Yeah, I do feel that we need to be a bit brave into actually facing the reality that exactly is the economic system and how it's actually distributed. We've actually had a chance in Wageningen to have this 2 workshops, one more focused on land use, and more focused on biodiversity, which is my aspect, where we were showing this different lands and areas that could be preserved and how much food it would save. You can see in the model, right? Like if we were to optimize the circularity, we're talking about a reduction of 3 times the amount of arable land. And as a lot of times talking to natural scientists, myself included, I'm a natural scientist by education, and it's very interesting to see they're surprised with the fact that, wow, can you believe we have this option and still it's not done? And it's not surprising. We actually know from our living experience that it's a lot to do with the fact that even though there is this culture of talking about efficiency, this definition of efficiency is still very much culturally assigned. I'm not a social scientist, but it's not necessarily efficiency in the sense of like land use. It's not efficiency in the sense of even yield reduction. And I would say that the models that we use are very, very significantly important in terms of aligning expectations of different areas. But it's important, like what Maria mentioned and like Michael mentioned, Maria mentioned the local needs. I think that's very important. We can see this in the types of waste you get in terms of the processing fractions, because they're processing fractions for the model, and it's different from country to country based on the economic development they're into. and also to understand, well, this should lead us. We need to remember not to forget. That was a very confusing sentence. We need not to forget the specific. We need to not forget the specific technologies from this traditional people that can actually bring a much more socially inclusive agriculture rather than this linear extraction-based process.
Excellent, Felipe. Maria, some thoughts? We'll have one more round robin in terms of wrapping up, but just let's get it started. And if I could ask you to talk a little bit about the emphasis on things like organics, right? Organic production, organic sort of systems. Are we done with that, or is that sort of the work that ICLEI is doing, for instance, right? There is the work that ICLEI has been doing as food systems is long-standing, but it's always been kind of emphasizing things like organics, not using pesticides. I think it seems to be circularity saying that's an important step, but that's not is insufficient to get us moving towards the direction that we need to go to.
Yes, indeed. So here at ICLEI, we actually prioritize, or we advocate for prioritizing this kind of practices, because we believe that circularity should also have a regeneration component. So regenerating the land is also being circular. So we believe in this kind of in this kind of view as well to when we are approaching circularity. When we are saying regeneration of land, for example, and reusing resources and recovering nutrients and so on, this is something that from a city perspective is very difficult to tackle. Like, it's very difficult to have it all, to tackle the whole food chain. So this is just examples that we put forward, ways that strategies that can be complementary or not to each other when working towards circularity. So this can be one very useful entry point, but there are also other ways. To emphasize this organic point, for example, we've worked with the city of Anchieta in Brazil, I hope I pronounce it right, Felipe, where by law, all the food that is procured for school canteens must be composed of at least 45% organic products, with a focus on procuring local traditional crops. So these are very actual, like, practical examples of things that are working for cities. That doesn't need to be a big transition, right? And there's many different policy instruments that cities can use that can prioritize organic farming and food production, but also economic instruments like pay-as-you-throw waste management schemes that doesn't have anything to do with agriculture, but it's also part of circularity as well. Cooperation instruments like enabling access to unused urban space, like the city of Rosario in Argentina is doing, but also educational instruments like business trainings, awareness campaigns at schools. So anything, all of these instruments require different levels of resources, because it's also good to note, and I think this is very important to say, that not all local governments around the world will have the same financial, infrastructural, and technical resources to make the circular transition happen at the local level. So we just want to provide different examples of things that can be within the local government's reach in order to make this happen.
Super. That's super helpful, Maria. Thank you very much for that. Could I just invite, I don't know if you, not Professor Milan from UT Johannesburg, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. So I know that we never met, but we exchanged some emails about the examples you gave in South Africa. So since we haven't talked enough about Africa, I believe it's sort of could you talk about your project, but maybe say something about from a Southern African perspective, what is circularity in food systems? What does that look like? And just building on the conversation we're having.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. That doesn't look so good out there, but what I've done is I mentor a few urban agricultural enterprises. And together with that,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just introduce yourself, who you are, and the work you do, and then get into?
Yes, thank you. And I think I believe my camera is on. Thank you very much. I'm a professor of business management at the University of Johannesburg. I've published in this journal, and thanks for that. And I run a project called Izindaba Zokudla, which means the court of the chief, where we discuss the food that we eat together. And I've adapted that as a public innovation lab at the University of Johannesburg that aims at assisting urban farmers to create better enterprises for urban agriculture. And what we've developed is a food for waste exchange, where you exchange both food waste and recyclables. And this then leads to a price reduction in the produce. And what it does is it creates a steady stream of inputs into these very, very small urban farms, which could be less than 500 square meters, possibly, if you're lucky. And the incomes are not great, but this enables much better production. And then on top of that, I've developed a whole enterprise system enterprise model on how to build. I teach entrepreneurship at the UJ, and how do you build a enterprise that produces low volumes but sell at very high price, and what are the business strategies that you can use to achieve that? And and it's available on the web, on izindabazokudla.com, and good luck pronouncing it.
Thank you, Professor Merlon.
Thank you. I hope that
Appreciate your
helps.
comments. No, that's very helpful to do that. So we're going to start slowly to kind of look at the last piece of our workshop. And just want to sort of, I have some thoughts, and many thoughts really, but I just want to invite any sort of thoughts that you're really burning to make, and it's to Felipe, Maria, and Michael, that, I'm sure that a lot of it's been, there's so many things in my brain right now that will take a long time to digest and reflect on. But is there one quick thing that from all the conversations we've had, you really want to think is important that perhaps needs to be emphasized? I'll start with Felipe, then Maria, and then to Michael.
Well, I will say two things, but very short ones, promise. The first one is, I think from our work, what I can say that this is direct results is the amount of meat we consume, and this we can reduce in actually creating systems that acknowledge the need for livestock, but also understand and as part of nature rather than this kind of industrial product is very important for the sustainability of food system worldwide. And for that to be done, which is the second piece, is we need to change how we interpret the food systems from just another market to the source of our food, especially with a growing population, the pressures we're going to see in the future.
Right. Maria?
Thanks. So just seeing basically the nature of this workshop, I think it is imperative to translate all this research that we've been doing, all this knowledge to different stakeholders. So how do we make this data that is already available? How do we actually translate it to different audiences? So working on academic paper submissions and so on, how are we making sure that this knowledge is able to reach local governments to be used, or is able to reach communities and other audiences? So I would say that is critical to have knowledge be translated for every stakeholder that might need to use it in terms of circularity.
So Michael, I don't know one question is 30-year corn, but I'd love to hear some your thoughts about sort of how do we make this.
Honestly, I think here, at the University of Arizona, I've got something going here, at least in the city of Tucson, and that's hopefully by next year we'll be able to use be able to give every Head Start student throughout our school system here a seed, a cup, and soil and water, just to understand the value of our food system. I think that's what we're missing. We're missing the connection that we have, not only with adults, but with the youth. And I think if we're really going to change stuff, we really need to get on the youth at that early age. So I'm going to do that here in the city of Tucson, and hopefully I'll make that a national issue at some point. But, I'm only one person.
Doing great work. We got some time. Just one thing that to me, it's not a summary of the workshop, but something that kind of wrestling with in terms of a lot of the issues have been raised here, which is that I think in Europe, I think the real test case for whether or not this will happen is the Netherlands, to be quite honest, in terms of, I know that, and reason, and Felipe is smiling because he knows exactly where I'm going to go with this, is that that what a lot of people don't realize is that not only are these issues so critically important for sustainability, regional level, local level, global level, but also politically is dynamite in terms of how to wrestle it. And all you need to think about is Netherlands, where basically, if Felipe, you have a comment on it, I'd love to hear it. But essentially, future pig farming determines who's going to be the next prime minister. And so these are not simply issues that sort of whether or not going to achieve the SDG goals, but these are issues that will determine who's going to be in office in countries like, just because what the Netherlands has sort of basically said, and policymakers and politicians agree on this, is that you have to make some choices. Are you going to strictly abide by the climate change goals? Or can you have, what kind of farming practice can you have? Can you build any more new buildings? I mean, you would think that you want all of those to happen at the same time, but what's happening is because of the constraints about climate change, Netherlands has basically said that if you want to have any more new kinds of development of some sort, whether it's business, buildings, that the carbon budget that the country has set, that it may be that certain kinds of farming, pig farming to be exact, which is one of the largest livestock kind of in Europe, may not really have a future. And of course, this is going to upset the pig farmers in the Netherlands, and I'm sure they're very good people, and their livelihoods are threatened. So how do we circle this, right? How do we circle to do this where politically, economically, environmentally, and socially all had to be in sync? Unfortunately, in many places, but particularly in the Netherlands, it is very doubtful that you could have carbon sort of budget alignment alongside, circular food systems and traditional farming practices that basically is not sustainable according to climate change concerns and whatnot. So I'll just stop there. I don't know a solution to this. All I know is that the Netherlands is a very interesting case where this will actually have to play out. And I don't know, at least in Europe, the most heightened example I can think of in terms of that. So I know, Felipe, you've done the PhD work. And any kind of, am I mischaracterizing what I just said?
No, if anything, the only thing that I would add is that, well, you see like this livestock and this pig farming and all of this, and you see it's funny because actually circularity, I think it's so strong here in the sense of the concept and so studied, regenerative agriculture and so on, especially in Wageningen, exactly because of this problem. Like nitrogen crisis is a major issue here. Like you said, in the Netherlands, there's like two types of executive branches, so to say. One of them is the water chambers, and the farmers actually won this year. They took over by surprise. No one was expecting that, and they took over. And you can see that you cannot just force solutions, and there is a disconnect. I think what Maria said is very true in terms of like translating the research. There is a disconnect between what farmers think and who we're talking with, and whether we're just producing the research for us and kind of echoing it, right? So the groups that we're already used to speaking. I feel that in a sense, it's funny because if we were to actually go through this one obstacle, communicating, the circularity kind of solves it. The reason why the nitrogen crisis is so intense here is to do with that we're taking feed from a lot of different countries, Brazil included, bring nitrogen from the crops there, and then they're being put here. If you go to one of these pig farms, you're going to see the amount of manure they produce. You can fertilize Germany, France, the Netherlands. It's really insane. Of course, you're going to have a problem there. Eventually, you have trouble to actually even export this. So, yeah, I think you're right on point with that.
Okay. So I think I want to give as much time. We have about 10 minutes before the workshop ends. I'm going to give as much time for our gracious host, Duncan, who's spearheaded the whole thing. Just wanted to thank and acknowledge the role that Duncan and Amy has had, and all of you know them as such to do that. So perhaps we could sort of give Duncan the opportunity to kind of be a host here a little bit about the calling for the papers and give his thought that he may have, since he spearheaded this really. So a lot of it goes to his credit. And then I'll give you the last sort of 7 to 10 minutes, Duncan, for you, and then anything you want to say.
Great, thanks, Jacob, and thanks to all our presenters. It really was an incredible workshop because picking up some new points of view, indigenous points of view, views from Europe. This is the kind of cross-fertilization that we need here on Turtle Island in North America and elsewhere. There's so much to learn from having our colleagues from around the world who are a little bit ahead of us on the curve here to share this knowledge, and it really has been incredibly valuable. I would like to invite the remaining participants who are online. Looks like we have about 118 of you. I would like you to share your own thoughts before you leave today. this could be reactions to what you heard. It could be your own ideas. We need your input. We really value scholars, practitioners, government officials, activists who are online to be sharing their experience. We would particularly love to see you reference examples of communities. This be any level of municipality. It could be a town, village, county, a state, multi-state region. Examples of where your organization or in your collaboration with local government or networks, you have been dealing with circularity across the three domains, economics, social, and environmental components of circularity, where you have drilled down in each one of those areas, or where you've been able to successfully address all three of those domains in a value chain or in a project, in a landscape context with multiple farmers. That's the kind of thing we're going to be interested in learning about in our this forthcoming issue, special call for papers next year. We want you to drill down deep and give us examples. We're less interested in the theoretical or the scope and scale of the problem. We heard a lot about that today. There's been a lot of research done on why circularity is important, what the problems are that circularity can address. Now, not that that's not important, we need to continue that basic research. But in this issue, we would really like to see case examples. We would like to see post-mortem analysis even of failed projects. That is so instructive when you can share what you did in a candid way and then present what workarounds you used in a conundrum, in a problem, in a wicked problem at the community level, or what failed and why you think it failed in this post-mortem analysis. Looking back, what could you have done better? What were stumbling blocks that were just insurmountable? We want to know that too. I know that's hard to write. Funders don't necessarily like you to write about failed projects, but that is something we're very interested in. This is a process that we will announce later this fall, but it'll essentially include a pre-submission review. We will be reviewing early versions of the manuscripts and inviting you to submit for peer review. So that the announcement will be coming out this fall. We'll have pre-submission reviews in the spring or maybe possibly late winter. You will be invited if it is topically appropriate for this call. You will complete your manuscript and we will give you instructions on how to submit it, format it, and submit it online in the summer of 2024.
Just as a clarifying question, when you're talking about pre-submission, can you possibly, I assume that there'll be some kind of a link to the video and everything else materials, but within that, can you just put a little bit of timeline in terms of, so that people know where to go to submit something, and a link or some kind of a, so can you do that?
Yeah, we'll be sending out an announcement when we finalize the announcement, which will include redrafting our current draft of the announcement. Right. It'll have those details. You'll have the link to where you submit. It's a query form that you submit. Right. You describe the manuscript, you answer a few questions, and you attach the manuscript to the pre-submission query. So all that instruction will be there after we finalize the call.
So there has to be a manuscript, or could there be an like a detailed abstract?
We'd like to have it in pretty good shape. We do not want an abstract alone. The reason is because we want to be able to make a detailed analysis of the appropriateness of the manuscript. And if it's just an abstract, we really can't do that. So we'd like to see a pretty well-developed idea or manuscript by spring. And that's what we'll base our invitation on. Okay.
And when would let's just say, like, for now, in terms of a month, when you say winter, like, since we're talking about it's maybe winter here, but summer somewhere else. Can you just give us in terms of a more kind of a very broad sketch of what people should expect? There's about 5 questions on the chat that's asking.
Our editorial team is going to be convening for the first time. We may be adding some individuals to that team. We hope to meet within I would say the period early December or early to mid-December. We'll convene. We will finalize our call for papers, and that will immediately go out. So we'll be announcing the final version of our call for papers with the deadlines, specific deadlines and instructions for submitting your peer pre-submission review.
Okay, so like
we'll keep an eye out for that. So
early
we'll
to
do
mid-December.
that. Yep, early to mid-December.
Okay, so that's my response to about 12 chats, questions. So early to look for something in your inbox or reach out to Duncan if feeling, but early to mid-December. That's sort of like a timeline that we're working for the finalized call for papers, and then of course that should explain the process from there on.
Yes, and as I say, I think that gives you time to work with colleagues to prepare your manuscripts, and if the concept is really strong and the manuscript is not completely prepared at the time of our pre-submission review deadline, just give me a heads up in advance. We try to work with you as best we can. I'm going to say we'll be announcing a hard deadline for pre-submission reviews, but if you let me know in advance you're struggling a little bit with getting the manuscript completely drafted, I can give you a little bit more time. I can give you some flexibility, but we're going to announce a hard deadline, and then if you need a little time, you just got to let me know in advance.
Okay, so I think that we just have like a minute or two. Perhaps we could end it with gratitude and thanks for the sponsors and for everyone, co-host sponsors. Anything you want to say? Amy, you want to say something?
I'd just like to thank everyone for coming, and again, it's wonderful to see people who we know are part of the JAFSCD community already, but we're thrilled to make people more aware of it and invite your involvement with this upcoming call and with JAFSCD for all your writing and reading needs.
Thank you, Amy. Duncan, from you?
Yes. Bedankt. Gracias. Merci. Danke. Bastante. Grazie.
And you speak all those languages, right?
I do. Do svidaniya. No.
Okay.
Yeah, just to echo what Amy was saying, we really appreciate your engagement with the journal. We'd love to see some more organizations and institutions and libraries become shareholders, of course. We have less connection to Europe, Asia, and the global South than we would like, and we'd love to see those relationships grow. And I'm looking forward to working with our editorial team for this special issue. Stay tuned. It's going to be, in the next month, we'll be making that announcement, and we'll look forward to seeing your pre-submissions queries in the spring.
Okay.
So
well,
thank you very much for everybody taking your time out today to be with us, and take care and drive safe on the way home.
Thank you, everybody, and really appreciate the time you spent with us. Hopefully this was useful and something that was good for your work and your future practice in circular food systems. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.